participate in the meeting can also watch it on the live stream on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel. A reminder to participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call on you to speak. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. Committee members will be called on first, followed by any other member of council who has joined the meeting. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For attendees, you'll find the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. For those calling in, press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. The usual 5-minute speaking limit will apply. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest convenience. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this subcommittee, residents may still send written submissions to council on either item. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the clerk's office at committees@ottawa.ca or by calling 613-580-2424, extension 22953. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. I have received regrets. So I have received regrets from Member Conforti and also Councillor Moffat. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they are called.
Member Halsell?
Here.
Member Podolsky?
Here.
Councillor Shirelli? Councillor McKenney?
Present.
Member Conforti? Councillor Brockington?
I'm here.
Councillor Moffat? Vice Chair Quinn? Chair King?
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, confirmation of minutes. Are the minutes of the meeting of September 8th, 2020 confirmed?
Carried, yes.
Thank you. So the first item on our agenda regards planning, infrastructure, and economic development, right-of-way, heritage, and urban design services. Number 1, the addition to the Heritage Registrar Centertown Heritage Study. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Good morning, certainly. My name is Avery Marshall. I'm a heritage researcher with the city's Heritage Planning Branch. This report, Additions to the Register, recommends listing 310 Centertown properties on the Heritage Register. I'd like to go over the report and explain why these properties were identified as candidates for the Heritage Register and what listing on the register means to owners. Next slide, please. Back in 2013, Council directed the Centertown Heritage Study through the Centertown Community Design Plan and an amended secondary plan for Centertown. This report is the first in a series of reports to be provided to the Built Heritage Subcommittee and Council. It's the first in a series of reports to be provided to Built Heritage Subcommittee and Council implementing the findings of the Centertown Heritage Study. We're bringing 2 reports to Council this fall. Additional reports will be brought forward in 2021. The reports that stem from the Centertown Heritage Study include listings on the Heritage Register and designation. Listing and designation are separate and distinct processes. Designation is when a municipality passes a heritage designation bylaw. The bylaw is registered on property title and changes to the property require approval from the city. Designation is not what we are talking about today. We're looking at listing properties on the register. Listing is a tool that we use to track demolition. There is no bylaw and no approvals from the city. The only requirement for listing is 60 days notice in advance of demolition. Please. So one of the goals of the Centertown Heritage Study was to undertake a comprehensive review of heritage resources in Centertown and determine if Centertown properties outside of the existing heritage conservation districts merit listing on the register. The City of Ottawa hired ERA architects to review every property in the study area and make recommendations based on their findings. ERA Architects is an award-winning firm specializing in heritage conservation and urban planning. The Centertown study area includes the core of Centertown's historic residential neighborhood. The area contains over 3,000 properties. So you can see on the slide, the map shows a black line with the boundary of the study area, Gloucester Street, the Rideau Canal, Catherine Street, and Bronson Avenue. The yellow area is the existing heritage conservation district. And the purple triangles, those show where the proposed additions to the Heritage Register are located. These are the properties before you today and listed in document 1 of this report. You can see the distribution is relatively even on the east side throughout the Golden Triangle. And on the west, there's a concentration around the Dundonald Park area near the district border. So how was it that these properties were identified? Next slide, please. The consultant ERA Architects, they created a database that inventoried all 3,104 properties in the study area. Each property was photographed and documented, and each property underwent a preliminary heritage evaluation. The consultants assigned a classification to the properties and delivered a comprehensive report and recommendations to the city in May 2020. This report is known as the Centertown Heritage Inventory. It's document 2 of this report. Next slide, please. The Centertown Heritage Inventory outlines the classification scheme that was designed to identify properties with heritage value and which could be candidates for an appropriate form of protection under the Ontario Heritage Act, such as listing. Significant resources are properties that are cultural, aesthetic, or historical landmarks of considerable value. These properties have significance beyond their immediate context. Character-defining resources are properties that play an important role in defining their historic context, clearly reflecting a characteristic pattern, activity, or attribute. The third category, character-supporting resources, are properties that support Centertown's historic context and can be related to a pattern, activity, or attribute. No classification are properties that contain a structure but do not currently contribute to their historic context. So these are buildings where the structure has been heavily modified to a point where its original design is no longer legible. Vacant at the time of inventory are properties that do not currently contain a structure, such as surface parking lots. So these 5 classifications inform the recommendations for every property in the study area. Next slide, please. In June 2020, the city mailed a letter to property owners in the Centertown Heritage Study area, inviting them to view the recommendations online and give feedback. The website included an interactive map showing each recommendation. So this is a screenshot of 326 Lyon, which currently has no heritage status and has 2 recommendations, the first being list on Heritage Register. The online consultation ended in July, and we received 77 responses. The comments were definitely a mix. Many were looking for information. Some opposed further heritage protection, while some supported the changes. Next slide. In August and September, heritage planning staff reviewed the recommendations and the feedback received during the online consultation. We looked through the properties and their classifications, and we identified a group of 310 properties classified as significant resources and as character-defining resources, the top 2 tiers of classification. This group of buildings is included in document 1 and is before you today for consideration as new listings on the Heritage Register. So why would we do this? Next slide. So why would we want to list properties on the Heritage Register? Well, listing properties on the register is a monitoring tool that tells us about the current building stock and offers interim protection. It allows for a pause before a building is demolished. Owners of listed properties are required to give 60 days notice in writing of their intent to demolish. During this time, our staff, we conduct a review. We inform the ward councillor and the chair of the Built Heritage Subcommittee that we have received the application to demolish. During this time, we'll also look at the property for if it merits designation. The ward councillor, the building does not merit designation. The 60 days expire and the owner proceeds with demolition. So this is typically the case. The 60 days do expire. To date, all of the 60 days notice have expired without council issuing a notice to designate. So this means that we can better track and manage demolition in Centertown, an area with increasing development pressure. Next slide, please. If owners want to request removal from the Heritage Register, we have a form on ottawa.ca. The form is emailed to staff and we bring a report forward on removals from the Heritage Register once a year as per the council approved Heritage Register procedures. Document 1 outlines the 310 buildings proposed in this report for listing on the Heritage Register. These are typical Centertown buildings that give Centertown its look and feel. As an inner city neighborhood, Centertown experienced several waves of development. Modern high-rises give Centertown its character, as do earlier red brick structures 2 to 3 stories high. The dates of the buildings range from the 1870s right to the 1970s and include designs by architects W. Nofke, Cecil Burgess, and John Pritchard McLaren, among others. Next slide. The bulk of the buildings in this report were built as detached homes. So one example is the Gable front cottage, a common type in Centertown. It's sometimes called a front gable house or a gable end to street house. You often see these buildings clustered together. This group is found along Somerset Street West. You can see there's a sloped roof with the gable end facing towards the street. They're red brick and built before the First World War. Next slide. Another example of a detached house is a type we're calling the hip roof with asymmetrical gable bay. This is sort of an Ottawa version of a bay and gable house. This is a typical type characterized by a prominent projecting bay that extends above the eaves. There are many variations. The main roof is hipped, sometimes truncated. The projecting bay is on the left or right. These examples are all from McLaren Street. Next slide. The last type I'll mention, there's more in the report from the consultant, is the row house. So Centertown, home to many early row houses. Typically, these are long, rectangular, 2-story buildings that contain a number of units, usually 3 to 5. Many were built with porches, balconies, and they have a cornice. Next slide, please. So of the 310 properties, 142 were built as detached houses, 87 are row houses, 48 are semi-detached, 17 apartments, and 2 triplexes. So that's nearly all of the buildings were built for residential purposes. Only 14 of the group were built for non-residential, so churches, schools, those types of buildings. Next slide. In terms of notification, owners were mailed a notice back in June and another notice in advance of this meeting stating that the city recommends listing their property on the Heritage Register. The mail-out included details about how to participate and contained a property information sheet. Following a decision by council, property owners will be mailed another notice informing them that the property was or was not listed on the register. Altogether, owners will have been contacted on 3 separate occasions. In addition to owners, we also notified Heritage Ottawa, the Centertown Citizens Community Association, the Centertown Heritage Study Working Group, and Ward Councillor Catherine McKenney, who supports the goals of the Centertown Heritage Study. Next slide, please. Identifying properties of cultural heritage value is an essential part of a municipality's role in heritage conservation. These buildings were identified as having cultural heritage value for their role in defining the character of Centertown. In conclusion, This report recommends that the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend that council approves the addition of properties listed in document 1 on the City of Ottawa's Heritage Register. This is in accordance with Section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall, for your detailed report. Much appreciated. We do have a number of speakers that have been registered to speak on this item. But before that, I'd like to acknowledge that we did receive a number of correspondence. The clerk's office did receive a bit of correspondence in terms of this item, especially around their opposition to the addition to these respective properties to the Heritage Register. That included a correspondence from Kabir Uddin Kabir regarding 160 Metcalf Street, dated October 8th. Farouz Wahab of Richcraft Group of Companies, who sent an email which also included a cultural heritage evaluation report prepared by John Stewart Commonwealth Historic Resource Management, dated July 2020, regarding 68 Cooper Street. Ursula Melens of Soloway Wright LLP, who had sent letters dated July 30th and October 8th in regard to 10 The Driveway. We did receive the Cultural Heritage Evaluation Report prepared by John Stewart of Commonwealth Historic Resource Management, dated October 8th, regarding 267 Bay Street. Joshua Moon of Hurley Robertson Hill and McDougall LLP sent a letter dated October 8th regarding 205 Catherine Street, and staff also circulated an update of public submissions dated October 9th. Our first registered speaker is Kabir Uddin Kabir, who will be talking about 160 Metcalf Street.
Kabir, if you could press *6 to unmute yourself, please.
I know that Kabir is calling in from the Richmond room in City Hall, so I do know that there will be some technical support that will be provided to him. If he's not able to log into the call right now and requires technical support, we can go to the second registered speaker, Farouz Wahab, if he is on the line.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps I can.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
That's your first speaker, Mr. Kadir.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak on this matter. I sent a letter saying, you know how what's in the property is owned by Capcan Foods Limited, of which I'm the part owner. And I take care of the building and do the maintenance and other things, whatever is required. I'm also a farmer in Temptville, which I explained, and I said later on that building was bought on 10th of April from Mr. and Mrs. McDonald. They owned for 18 months, around about that time, and at that time they were behind in taxes for 81, which the amount I mentioned 6,976.86 cents, plus the including the interest, plus the water bill 555.24, which were paid at the price at the time of the purchase. There were 13 bachelor apartments in there, and they were all badly run down. The time of the purchase, I had one thing in mind, because I used to run a bed and breakfast in Oxford, England, and we were far away, as I mentioned, we were far away from the city. So I bought this when I emigrated here. I bought this with the idea to be close to the city center as possible. So when I took the possession of the building, it was I noticed there were 2 chimney stacks which were very badly damaged, and there was a possibility of crashing them on the house or on somebody else and getting somebody hurt. So I took care of them and took the first and second floor, the fireplaces out of the building as well. Then the heating system was not very good, because there were old cast iron radiators which was corroded, and the heating it was not heating the third floor properly, and a little bit the second floor. So I have to take that in consideration, and we have to change to four-stair heating system. And also I noticed the building is sinking in the middle, because there's too much, there was blasting going on around, not at that time, but later on, and also the heavy traffic on the road. In 2005, there was second floor, we had office space, and I wanted to change it to the part of the restaurant, because most of the time it was vacant, and the taxes were very high. So I applied this second floor to be part of the restaurant, and then I was told that I have to pay $12,000 parking in lieu. And Madam Diana Home was the elder lady at that time. And I told her, I don't have that kind of money, and I can pay a penny for each parking. And she said, no, either you have to pay or I'll put it on the heritage list. And which I didn't want it, because I knew the building. Building is in a very bad run-down shape. So I didn't want that thing to happen. So I ended up paying $12,000 because which I suffered great deal of hardship. And I also, to renovate the building, I took $50,000 from my locked-in pension from the university to renovate the second floor and the building. And
1 minute left.
Sorry.
1 minute left.
1 minute left. Okay. In the end, I will, there's some other things to talk to, but in the end, I would like the committee member to please come and have a look inside what is there to put on the heritage. And it doesn't make any sense. The other thing is, with the building, a 27-story building at the back, you can see on the internet, that has done a lot of damage to the building. It has cracked and is sliding inside the the big dig they did that. And I give the what's the name, the report of from the Explorer Tech, give what was before they started building, and what is now. So the matter now is in the hand of the lawyers because the building is sinking, and and I request and ask, appeal the people on the committee to come and have a look what is there, and then make a decision. I don't think it's worth putting this. I don't have money right now to demolish it.
Time's up.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Kabir, for your deputation. We do have a question for you from Councillor Brockington.
Yes, sir.
Thanks,
Go
Chair.
ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kabir. I don't understand. Are you opposed to having your property listed on the city's heritage register? And if
Yes, sir.
yes, why?
Yes, sir. Why? Because the thing is, first of all, the building is splitting into two, and the building has changed since I bought it. There's no stack. Excuse me. There are no stack pipe. There's a lot of things inside which are not very good. I keep propping it up. I keep putting the metal post to see I can carry on for the time being because I don't have the money to redevelop it. So this is the reason, and it's not worth putting this building in because it's already split and it's sliding into the big dig they made for 27-story building, and the matter is in the hand of the lawyers to see if they can. And I was told by the builders, which in whom I have the trust. He said this has to be done from the bottom up. You cannot repair the building like this. It has already gone down, and it's still sliding. And my tenants, who were there was a restaurant by backdrop, they left the building because the building they couldn't open the door. They couldn't open the door to the coolers and other doors as well. So they just had enough, and they had some problem with the taxes as well. Excuse me. So they left, and then I re-rented to somebody else who hasn't paid anything, and he has demolished a lot of things inside, and he's walked out as well because of this COVID-19. So I don't think there is any need to put this building on the heritage list because you can see from outside. I put the metal roofing because there was always a lot of problem with the ice falling in winter, for which I was always worried about the people walking on the street. So I have that installed with the insulation underneath it. So it's now it makes the icicle, but not that bad. So that's the only thing which looks very nice, but there's nothing nice inside.
Okay, I'll stop you there. Thank you very much for your presentation today.
Yes, thank you very much. I would very much like you, all of you, to come and see, make an appointment. When you have a time, I'll show you everything inside, and you will believe that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that there's a question from Member Podolsky.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Kabir. If you would stay on the line for a moment. My question is to you, and if you can't answer it, perhaps staff can answer it, and that is that on the ERA report, your property is identified as a character-defining resource, which is the second highest level category outside the district. And did you receive and understand the Heritage Survey and Evaluation form that was prepared for this property? I guess my question to you is, did you receive it, and did you get advice on the validity of it? And if not, has the city actually prepared a full Heritage Survey and Evaluation form for this property, and of course, all the other 310 properties?
I haven't received anything as far as I know, because I always, I always follow whatever is going on, but I haven't received that. But I think And I just want to bring something else out. I talked to the, I think the heritage the planners, and I asked them, if I remember correctly, asked them to come and have a look, and they're just making a decision sitting inside, but they are not coming to see what is there to put on the heritage list. And I'm not in this situation that I be able to demolish it today and rebuild it, because I don't have those resources. I'm busy with a farm which I'm developing as a pioneer in building the farm from scratch, and I'm busy with that as well. And the rest of the time I spend here take care of this from day to day, so that we keep on moving. Does this answer your question, sir?
Yes, it does. Perhaps, Chair King, we could ask the staff about the circulation of the survey and evaluation form for this property and all the other properties.
Absolutely. I'll allow latitude there. So if staff can respond to that.
And again, I will very much request all the respectable member of the committee to come and have a look. That will be my, I'll urge and I'll.
Thank you, Mr. Kabir. We've noted that, and now we're asking staff to respond to Member Podolsky's inquiry about outreach.
Certainly. So we sent a letter in the mail to Mr. Kabir and the other owners. It included a property information sheet. So it's not the same type of document as the heritage survey form that was mentioned. The heritage survey form is something used when we're designating a property. It's the Ontario Regulation 906 criteria. For the listing on the register, that's not the criteria that the city has used, and it's not what our consultant has looked at. We looked at a different type of review that really focused on architecture and on context, and we submitted that document to the owners in the mail out. So that went through the year built, the estimated year built. It went through the architectural style and also had notes. For example, 160 Metcalfe is a corner property, so it contributes to 2 different streetscapes. So that was the material that was sent, and we didn't hear anything back in terms of concerns or errors on this one, but certainly I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Now we have our next speaker who is registered on the list, Mr. Feroz Wahab. So please go ahead.
Oh, it's actually Miss Feroz Wahab, just to clarify.
Apologies.
No problem, no problem.
Passive apologies, sorry.
It's okay, I get it all the time, no problem. So just a bit of a history on the file. Richcraft is actively looking to develop the property at 68 Cooper. As part of our due diligence, we have contacted City Heritage staff on several occasions over the last year to discuss the heritage value of the property, after which we were left with the clear impression that the city had no interest in the property and no intention to designate. Subsequently, through the Centertown Heritage Study, we were informed that the property is recommended to be listed on the Heritage Register as it's considered to be a character-defining resource. We submitted a cultural heritage evaluation report with our consultant CHRM and to challenge the recommendations, and we're informed that the recommendation will still stand. Our report assesses the potential heritage value against the current provincial regulations, and we'd like to take this opportunity to have John Stewart speak to the evaluation and why our property should not be listed specifically. So I can direct it to John.
Thank you so much, and John Stewart is next on the list.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. I was engaged by Richcraft to have a look at 68 Cooper Street probably 2 years ago, and at that time I spoke with Heritage staff and questioned what if any, the city's plans were, and was told that they had no intention of designating and no intention of incorporating this. So when this came along, Richcraft asked me to develop some sort of an analysis to determine whether in fact there was value and why it was considered a character defining property. And basically what I prepared is a identification and evaluation under Ontario Regulation 0906 criteria for determining heritage value. You look at the property, it's a mid-block location. It's on the south side of Cooper Street, bound the block between Cartier to the west and the driveway to the east. The house originally is one of 27 residences built on Cooper Street between the driveway and Cartier Street. It's the only one remaining. The property has literally been orphaned. It sits in, it's adjacent to a parking lot which extends from over to Cartier. It has a hydro easement station next door and a fenced garbage area, adjacent a high-rise occupying the through block. Across the street are the 10-story Embassy Hotel, and next to it a 17-story residential high-rise. The only traditional or heritage property in the area is the 1929 Catholic Church, which is on the corner. In terms of the property itself and the review that was taking place, the building itself it's a nice piece of architecture. It was quite a handsome building, and for that reason, when we did the evaluation, we incorporated the property has design value, and it was determined to be an example of a style. It's a standard form. It's 1895. It's red brick, asymmetrical. Sorry, I'm looking for the term. Hip roof with asymmetrical gable. In terms of the other criteria, it doesn't display a high degree of craftsmanship. It doesn't display technical, scientific. In terms of historical associations, the property was owned by, the original owner was E.J. O'Connor, who was a clerk at the post office, and other owners are local businessmen within the area. In terms of yield, as a potential yield for information, it does not apply. And then in the category 3, the contextual value, as I said earlier, the property has been orphaned. It literally sits. Can you go to page 4 of the document, please? It literally sits in a parking lot. It's here, and high rise all around it, and the church, as I said, is the only one in the area. Go to the next slide, please. Next page, please. Sorry. Again, looking from in front of the building, you can see the high rise, and looking the other direction towards the canal. It again is surrounded by high rises. The conclusion.
1 minute left.
Thank you. The conclusion that we came to was that, in fact, it's as a building, there is physical value, but the fact that it's been left completely without context, it's very doubtful whether, in fact, if the request for demolition, that the city would be able to designate it. And for these reasons, question why they would go ahead with a listing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. And I see that there is a question from Councillor McKinney.
Hi, thank you, John, for that. And I think you actually answered my question in your last sentence, but I will ask it just so that I have a clear understanding. So, is your concern being on the register because you would feel that there would be some risk to redevelopment if you had to wait for the 60 days for demolition, or is it that you feel that it could, it may lead to an actual designation? And also, I guess my next question I'll ask this of you as well. Like, you did also mention it's, the hip roof asymmetrical gable style, and outside of its context, its physical context, do you agree that it would be difficult to put other very similar properties on the register and not include this one that looks very much like the others, mostly on McLaren?
I think if you're dealing directly with the architecture, I have no question that the building it's a pattern book, Queen Anne style. It's a nice building. It's red brick. I think really what I question is why you would want to put that on as a character defining feature when the character of the area is completely altered. It's surrounded by high rise. It's identified as an area for larger scale buildings. It doesn't really represent what historically was there, or what presently today is the intent of that area. So I question whether or not, from that point of view, whether or not it would make sense to move it forward. I think if you're talking about character defining, it doesn't define that area anymore. It definitely is I guess an orphan in that particular setting.
Okay, and I'll follow up with staff after on that question, but just back to my first question, just want to confirm then your opposition is to having it just registered even, rather than, or is it that you worry that it would lead to designation? Because we're just talking about being included on a register right now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
At this point, I think the question is, why would the city want to register a property that doesn't represent what they're promoting? If it's not character defining, because character defining is in fact, you take a look at the area and it doesn't define that area anymore. It's the one remaining building of the 26 that were on that street. So to me, it's not a logical process that the city is going through in this particular case. I understand that the intent and the definitions, but I question whether this particular definition, character defining, is a valid.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. So at the end of the delegations, I will have some questions for staff. So thank you for that, Mr. Stewart.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I just wanted to double check whether Councillor Brockington had any questions for Mr. Stewart.
I as well am going to wait till we get to staff.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. The next registered speakers are Michael Casey and Ursula Malins of Soloway Wright LLP, who are speaking and addressing the driveway.
And I believe Mr. Casey is going to start, but if we could have our visuals put up, please.
Good morning, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and members of council. This all started a couple of years ago, and we received a original notice. And the original notice says that the primary architectural style for 10 the driveway is modernism. We agree with that. The assertions that have now been made as we have moved through the process center on the brutalism nature of the design. And I take exception to the building falling into that category. When you look at what brutalism is and you go on to all the websites and you look at examples of brutalism, they are characterized by the words massive, monolithic, blocky, and poured concrete. The bulk of the examples, almost all of the examples of brutal apartment buildings lack balconies.
Can you go to the first picture, please? Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah. If you could, next picture, please. There's a close-up of the balconies. Okay, so there's another, the next picture down, please. I apologize. Okay. The balconies are fluted. The underside of the balcony is fluted. The front face of the balcony is fluted. The front of the building, the ends of the building are articulated. There is no monolithic mass of concrete here. This is all precast. The building was built in 1970. It was actually started when I was still at Lisgar Collegiate. The comparable buildings in the neighborhood that would be considered, I think, brutal would be the courthouse and the National Arts Center. You will all remember that the National Arts Center went to great expense to debrutalize its entrance last summer and the summer before with the massive change on Elgin Street. So we've got a building that sits on a podium, is been maintained quite well by us, and will be around for many, many years to come. I am a practical person, and dealing with practicalities, the ability for me to empty out a 186-unit apartment building and do so within a 60-day period that would prevent you from doing anything is not possible. It's not practical. You know, when I come back, so you know, I don't know what you're trying to protect here, and I think you're protecting the wrong thing. What are the design elements of this building? You know, when I read the criteria, it talks about a local design skills. Well, the firm that designed this was Rose and Caruso, and they came from Montreal. You talk about Cornish features. The building doesn't have a Cornish at all. It's got a precast panel. There's no porches as such. They're balconies. The doors are not carved or trimmed. They're glass. For a demonstration of original building massing, shape, and volume, I would argue that there's 1,000 buildings throughout Ottawa that have the same shape, perhaps not volume, some smaller, some larger, and massing and depth. Bromley Square would be another good example. Additions or modifications, none have been done to this building.
1 minute left.
When you look at the neighborhood heritage statement attributes that should be considered, A would be reflecting thematic and cultural references. There are none here. Contributes to the heritage fabric of the street. In fact, the houses on the street were removed and this new modern building was installed. I don't think that it has common attributes with Lisgar Collegiate, its neighbor, or the Armory, its neighbor 2 blocks away. Connects to the landscape. No, we changed the landscaping completely when the building was built. You know, is known for a historical incident or a person living there. Not so far. There is still a future. So in conclusion, I would like you to not add 10 driveway and impose any listings on it. I think that your time could be far better spent on properties that are in fact of heritage value. Thank you.
And so if I may now just make my submission slightly different than Mr. Casey's, we wanted to take the this is not just, there's no disrespect meant to staff or ERA, but the information that was actually provided to 10 the driveway in regards to why this was proposed to be included on the list was really quite inadequate. It was one page. It had approximately 20 words saying early brutalism without an explanation as to what that really meant. So, you know, we do look for additional information from the city should they proceed forward with any of the future studies. Nevertheless, it is our submission that this does not satisfy the criteria for inclusion. Mr. Casey went into some of the specifics in regards to the building, but one of the notable things about the ERA report is that most of the buildings they identified or recognized, you know, whether it's the reports, the photos in the report, or even many of the examples you're going to hear spoken to specifically today, are the houses, the red brick houses. That is very typical of the center town character, as opposed to this building, which is very much unlike that. As Mr. Casey said, it was actually the typical center town community that was demolished in order to construct this in 1970s. This building is not brutalism. It's located near the canal. It does stand in contrast to the existing community, which is really to the south and even to the west. There are many low-rise houses as opposed to this apartment building. And of note, today was the first time I actually heard that it wasn't the Reg 0906 criteria that was not applied by the city NERA. So that regulation is what comes out of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it's what they look at when they're determining whether or not to assign heritage interest to it. So it does look at design or physical value. Is it rare or unique? High degree of craftsmanship? Does it demonstrate a high degree of technical or scientific achievement, which we submit does not apply in this case? It's not associated with a historical theme, event, or person. The property doesn't have any contextual value either. It doesn't define or support the character of an area. It's not linked to the surroundings. It's not a landmark building. Now, having said that, again, going back to the ERA report, it talks about character supporting resources, and it identified this building as having a character supporting resource, but it doesn't really, the criteria that ERA referred to in order to determine that is the period of development. Is it pre-1875 or is it 1876 to 1914? This building does not qualify. Is it an expression of an early or a notable or rare development? This building really is not remarkable in regard to any of those categories. And it's also not part of a grouping or a streetscape. So regardless of whether we look at the regulation or ERA's stated criteria, this building just doesn't seem to fit into any of the categories as to what makes it remarkable or heritage. So based on that, it's not an indication of brutalism. It's not remarkable. We don't believe it should be listed on the city's heritage register at this point in time. That would be my submission.
Thank you for your submission, for your joint submission. I don't see any questions from the subcommittee. So the next registered speaker.
Sorry, Chair. I should have put up my hand. I just want to confirm we're going to go back and ask questions of staff. So my question on 10 Driveway is to staff. So I just want to confirm that I'm not losing my opportunity.
No, you wouldn't
Okay.
be able to ask that to staff. Yes, after the submissions.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So thank you for your submission. The next registered speaker is Joshua Moon from Pearlie Robertson Hill and McDougall LLP, speaking to 205 Catherine Street.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, councillors, public members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking on behalf of 1716799 Ontario and the Reed family, Grant Reed being the principal representative of the owner of 205 Catherine Street. I made a written submission. I'm going to start with the main concern up front is, for whatever reason, partly because they were outside the Heritage Conservation District and didn't really realize they were inside the study area. although they got a notice in June, it did not specifically refer to their property. September 28th was the first date that they got a specific notice with respect to 205 Catherine Street. We only got the evaluation sheet on Friday, although it's actually not labeled as an evaluation sheet. And it does have a little bit more information, but not a lot. So there was only 9 business days from the date of formal notice to this hearing. So no effective time to spend time with staff or the consultant or make comments or get their comments. And certainly over the long weekend, we couldn't make arrangements for that, having received the further information, which I believe is the evaluation sheet, although not labeled. The owners of this property would like to have the opportunity to actually speak with staff. Procedural and administrative fairness requires a reasonable period of time to take these steps, understand the city process, and evaluation staff approach to this property. We would like to have this delayed and not sent on to council. Perhaps you can create a category of properties that can go later if there's no resolution or no submissions that change staff's mind or your mind eventually at a subsequent hearing. I think that that's the strongest and first position of the owners of this property. It's just too short a period of time. In any event, while being on the registry list is not designation, that's understood. We know it. It's clearly a precursor to some opportunity for the city to analyze it for designation in the future. So while I don't profess to have the expertise of some of the people on this video conference and video committee meeting, many years ago in almost a previous lifetime, I started my professional life as a heritage resource urban planner. So I have a little bit of knowledge. And so I did go to regulation 0906 to look at what's the ultimate test in the end, not the test that your staff are applying and your consultants are applying here at the registry stage. What's the ultimate test for designation? And in my written submission, and I hope you take the time to read it, I at least make a preliminary statement. And I'm not professing that it's a professional opinion similar to what some professional consultant could give. But by any standard, 205 Catherine Street would never be designated. It doesn't even fall into the category that the consultants think might be considered for designation. It falls into the category character defining resource. And one of the reasons it's a character defining resource, on the very slim notes that we've received, is the use of glass block. My client tells me 40 years ago when the family and he acquired the property, there was 3 or 4 courses of glass block. He added on to make it some 8 or 10 or 12 layers of glass block. He changed the building and I list the changes. So effectively, you're saying Grant Reed is heritage, not the building. Now,
1 minute left. With
some levity, but I don't think it would stand any test of designation. There's no other properties on Catherine Street on the list, so I don't see how it's a character defining resource when Catherine Street doesn't have other properties being added to the list. We heard the discussion of orphan. It might be an orphan, we don't know. Give us some time to meet with staff. Give us some time to learn more about this property. We're asking for a deferral of this property to allow that process to continue. Now, I hesitate to offer this to you, but at the very least, even if you don't offer a deferral, there's sort of a deferral built in. My understanding is there's character supporting resources, and that category is that it falls to further staff review, and that would allow owner consultation, and it wouldn't be put on the registry immediately. Those are my submissions within the 5 minutes I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moon, for your submission. We do have some questions from Councillor Brockington.
Just one question, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moon, thank you for your presentation. One question for you. The next meeting of the subcommittee is November 13th, exactly 1 month from today. Is that sufficient time for you and your client to meet with staff?
I don't know the answer to that because I don't know the availability of staff. One would think it would be enough time. It would be availability of staff. Meetings are actually convenient now because they're all not done in person. They're done by this technology. So
okay.
Certainly that is achievable. It's a month away and presumably there could be some time.
Fair enough. Thank you. That's all I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington, and thank you, Mr. Moon. And now I'd like to call again on John Stewart of Commonwealth Historic Resource Management to speak to 267 Bay Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. 267 Bay Street. This is it's a two-story corner building constructed in between 1902 and 1912 as a drugstore, and it's continued to carry on the operation as a sort of a service, commercial service building within the neighborhood. It's on the corner of Bay Street. Basically, we took a look at this again using the criteria 0906 and to determine whether or not it would be considered appropriate to designate this building if it came to pass. I think Mr. Moon referred to precursor to analysis. The building itself has it was a nice little building. It was part of a larger structure. It was attached to a 2.5-story end gable. And just recently, the property has had an 18-story apartment building built right next to it with the balconies overhanging. Again, the situation occurs that you have a reasonable building that has been modified over time. In this case, the ground floor has been covered in siding. It's modified to the point that the original building is difficult to determine. And the ERA designation is character defining. I question whether, in fact, given the circumstances, that it is character defining, and the fact that there have been a number of modifications to the point where the building is not readable, that a portion of the building has been demolished. I wonder again whether there's a logic in going forward with registering this and placing it in a situation where, in fact, the merits of the context and the merits of the building do not deserve the recognition, particularly as character defining. Thank you very much. That's my submission.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I don't see questions for you from the subcommittee. So the final registered speaker for today on this item is David Fleming of Heritage Ottawa.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much. I am the chair of the Advocacy Committee for Heritage Ottawa. I'm going to congratulate city staff on bringing this matter forward. It's it's nice to see more buildings being considered for the register. And this is I think we're still feeling our way along with this process. I remember when the first properties were proposed for inclusion on the register, one of the challengers said that this was tripwire to designation, that somehow once property was put on the register, then the next thing it would automatically become, the city would want to register it as a designated property under the Ontario Heritage Act. This hasn't been the case. And I think in the city staff report, they mentioned that all the applications for demolition have subsequently been approved for properties that are on the register. So it hasn't been a tripwire. It hasn't been even a precursor for analysis, as the previous speaker noted. So I think it's a process, and we're feeling our way along. I think it's very legitimate for people to challenge this, and I think the more challenges that are made to the decisions and to the recommendations, the more we're going to be able to fine-tune our heritage register. I guess I urge you to give serious consideration to the properties that are on the list, and look forward to other properties being proposed for the register in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. And I don't see questions for you from the subcommittee. So does the subcommittee now have any questions for staff? And I know that Councillor McKinney had a question, so I will let her lead off.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to everyone who came out today, and to staff. This has been a long process that has been challenged by a pandemic and the way that we work. So it's good to have it in front of us. You know, I'm fortunate enough to be the councillor that represents Centertown. And it is one of the most important in terms of its heritage, from a heritage aspect, one of the most important neighborhoods in the city. And you know, I support the entire heritage study as we move forward, and you know, starting today with the inventory. We've been down this road before in other neighborhoods, and I think that, you know, while much of the same concerns have been raised, you know, while we considered other additions to the register, each we have to really think about in its, you know, within its own merits. So I do appreciate the challenge to the register as well. But on that, my questions for staff, if you could, because much of the conversation today revolved around the definition of character defining resource and what that means in terms of a building within its context. We heard the words like orphan, and unfortunately, there are many what I think are important heritage buildings, just from their characteristics that are surrounded by parking lots, because we have too many parking lots in the downtown. So can you just explain to us what the definition? I know it's written down here, but when you talk about character defining, does that mean it's defined within its context, like by its neighbors, within a block, within you know, the entire district?
Yes, certainly. So I'll read the definition from URA's report. Character defining resources are properties that play an important role in defining their historic context. So in this, when I say historic context, we're looking at the entire study area. So we're looking at the neighborhood, the bulk of the Centertown neighborhood, the entire Centertown Heritage Study area. that's the context in general. And certainly we're then looking at, ERA had grouped into 3 segments. So we have sort of the Golden Triangle, we have Central Centertown, and then we have West of Bank. So again, the consultants and staff, we looked at it again within that neighborhood context. So which section of the study area did it fall into? And then after that, we do look at often, you know, across the street, around the corner, that closer sort of block, if you will.
Okay.
So I'll continue with the rest of the description. So character defining resources, properties that play an important role in defining their historic context, clearly reflecting a characteristic pattern, activity, or attribute of the area. And I'll just mention, so pattern, activity, or attribute. An activity, that could be something like commerce, like a corner shop. A pattern could be, you know, the way that a certain brickwork is done, or, you know, the design of a building. And attributes of the area, some of the attributes of the area are that layeredness of it, how there were waves of development, and how you may have had an older building and then it had an addition or it was expanded, and even how different waves came in before, you know, the Second World War and then continuing today. So I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of what we're looking for context.
It does. Thank you. About 10% of the buildings that you looked at in Centertown, in what was within the study area, about 10% have been recommended for addition to the register. Is that unusually high? Is it about average? Whenever in the past you've looked at, I don't know, maybe you can't answer that today. I might be putting you a bit on the spot. I just thought of it while you were speaking earlier, actually. But I just wonder, you know, if that's if 10% is an average of what is added to a register from a study area.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure I can give you a full answer, but I do think other neighborhoods that have existing heritage conservation districts, a lot of the buildings are already captured within those districts. So somewhere like Sandy Hill, for example, or Lower Town, I think would have maybe similar numbers. Perhaps the Glebe is a better comparison. It's a bit of oranges to apples again, but certainly the Glebe, you know, also has 2 heritage conservation districts and also has a similar number of properties on the register. So I would say it's comparable. I think it's on par with other older neighborhoods that have a similar timeline and similar sort of waves of development that have occurred.
Okay. And if I could sum up, and I know that I'm missing some nuances here, but if I could, you know, sum up the concerns of owners and their representatives today who have submitted comment to us. The key concern is, you know, how this could lead to designation and what that means as a kind of a precursor. Do you know, on average, how often do we designate a property without it ever being on the register? I mean, it seems to me it happens all the time, right? Like you can go from not being on the register to being designated. That's correct?
That's absolutely, yes, absolutely correct. There's no requirement when you designate a property or when staff move a report that's asking for a designation. There's no requirement in there for it to be listed first. There are different tools that we use. Really, the register is something we're looking at to monitor and track how fast we're losing buildings, especially in an area like Centertown. Designation has a different goal, and that's preservation, long-term preservation.
Okay. And do you know offhand how many demolitions have not been granted because buildings were on the register in the last year, say 2 years?
So the stat I have is a little bit longer. So we changed, we shifted to a council approved procedure in 2016. This is our stat from the report. So we've received 18 notices of intent to demolish. So 60 days notice, we've received 18 of them. So 18 owners came forward and told us through our form online that they were planning to demolish the building, and so we started the clock. And in every instance, the clock expired and there was no notice of intent to designate issued by council. And that's something we expect to continue. We're not moving to designate on every building that we get a notice for. That's not the goal of the listing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think that's important to note. Also, the reason we do this is so that we are tracking, our heritage. We are tracking the cultural value of our built form in our neighborhoods. And, I compare it a little bit sometimes to, trees. Like I get a really good reason once a day, sometimes, certainly once or twice a week, why large trees should come down in Centertown. And it's much the same thing. It's like, we have to know what the value of something is and what the aggregate value of something is, so that we can ensure that it is protected, and we're at least giving a sober second thought to demolition. And when I think about 10 driveway, absolutely, it's not going to be demolished in 60 days. So I'm just not sure that I understand fully the rationale for not wanting it on a register, unless it's just that, it leads to possible designation. But we know that can happen. That can happen anyway. Okay, that's all the questions I have for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McKinney, and Councillor Brockington is next with questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to staff for their good work. Certainly a unique part of our city, Centertown and beautiful Somerset Ward, and appreciate the report before us today. I just wanted to walk us through the 5 objections that we heard this morning, and I'm going to comment. I will have a few questions, Mr. Chair, but I'm going to intertwine my commentary with questions just to get it all out at one time. The first was 160 Metcalf. I have no issues with this being on the register. I have no questions. I don't think there was a case made here to pull it off. 68 Cooper was next. I think the delegate made the case for me why it should be on the register when he said it's the last of 27 of these homes on Cooper Street, which I think is very sad. It's a very distinct building. And I think this is why we have a Built Heritage Subcommittee. It's to preserve the heritage buildings like 68 Cooper. And as the local councillor just added, we're talking about adding it to the register. So as we heard at previous meetings where people were quite concerned about what this would limit them to do, which basically isn't anything, I have no objections at all with 68 Cooper on the list. I'll just skip to the last one, 267 Bay Street, a unique looking building. Again, I have no issues with it coming on. I mean, staff has made their case. If people have objections on the committee, they can speak up. But I do want to talk to 2 items. One is 205 Catherine. The representative, Mr. Moon, claimed there was insufficient notice. And I want to ask staff, would you be opposed if I put a motion forward deferring this item to the November 13th meeting, and that in order to give Mr. Moon and the owner an opportunity to meet with staff? Due diligence will be, met, and we may ultimately be, discussing adding this a month from now. But do you have any opposition to a motion to defer for 1 month?
I think my only concern would be if there are plans to demolish between now and then, which is unlikely, but otherwise, no, I don't have any concerns. We've discussed it here and we'd be very comfortable with a deferral to November.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I would like to move a motion that for property at 205 Catherine Street, that the recommendation to add be deferred 1 month.
And that's acknowledged.
Okay. I want to chime, I'm not the heritage expert, so I'm looking to my colleagues to comment on the 10 driveway. I'm struggling on the 10 driveway. I think, a case has been made that by the representative of the owner that It should not be added. I'm willing to put a motion on the floor that this come off, but I want to hear from colleagues first, Mr. Chair. So I'm just putting my thoughts out there, and we'll defer to my colleagues, but I want to wait until others have spoken before I move that motion, but I want to sort of float my intent at this time. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that Member Podolsky also has some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair King. One of the, by the way, just as an aside, it is really heartening to see that of the 310 properties that are recommended for the list, there's only 5 property owners that have concerns with this, either in terms of the process and timing or the substance of the report. I mean, I think that what this demonstrates is that the public in Centertown, the public generally, has provided support for the whole of the register in other neighborhoods. So I think that this is a tribute to a kind of synchronous shared values between planners and city council and the public. There's one thing that I want to ask to the staff, if I could, and that is on the in the ERA report, they include classification of buildings both inside the district and outside the heritage conservation districts. The classification of the significant resource in a red, the character defining resource in a kind of orange, and then and so on down the line. In the case of 10 Driveway, the representatives of the owners, the lawyer and one of the owner builders, talked about the city advising that this was classified as a character defining resource, a second category. But in looking at the ERA map of the district, it is identified as a significant resource. So can you help the committee members understand, given the fact that there isn't a heritage inventory and evaluation form for this, whether it is the first category, which ERA is recommending to proceed with designation, or is it the second category? So could you clarify that? And then I have a follow-up question.
Yes, I can. So the consultants evaluated this property as a significant resource. And that recommendation is for city staff to conduct further review before moving ahead with any survey forms or any procedure to initiate a designation. So when we conducted our review of the work and of the report we received from the consultant, we looked at the significant resources and determined that it was appropriate and that our criteria was satisfied to recommend it as a listing on the register. So in this case, we do find that it meets the criteria of a character defining resource, along with the other resources or listings recommended in this report. And that further review will be done down the road, likely next year.
So if I can understand that, in the ERA report, which I read very carefully, they are recommending that a significant resource, which staff has now endorsed in your own views, that this is a candidate for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act.
I would say that there's potential, certainly, as a character defining resource, and considering the classification from ERA, we'll be looking into it.
I understand. Chair King, I think that one of the things that I think that the whole process, of developing the inventory and lists has had difficulty with over the last number of years is that the level of research that was enabled by the program was relatively superficial. I mean, the amount of energy and research that was applied to the various neighborhoods left a lot of doubt as to whether or not the evaluation criteria of Regulation 0906 light was really being applied in order to help people understand, not only members of the Built Heritage Committee, but the public generally, about whether or not the listing is en route to being a designation. And I think this is something perhaps that we need to work with in the Centertown study here. We're pretty lucky in that there's only a few exceptions to broad acceptance and trust of the city's program. And so my question has been answered, but I think that I would be generally supportive of Councillor Brockington's intent that there should be quite a bit more work done, perhaps on these 5 properties, and perhaps they all are deferred of sufficient time to be able to go through a more rigorous process of evaluating of whether they are significant resources or character defining resources or something lower down the chain. I think we owe this to helping the public, city councillors and ourselves to understand how buildings are evaluated and how they are eventually designated and what actions are taken on them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Podolsky, for that. As a follow-up to staff, since I see that there are no other questions, I'm curious about the amount of resources that were applied to the number of review of properties that are to be listed, especially 10 the driveway. And I was wondering if you could speak as well to the merits, I guess the heritage merits that the owners had issues with in terms of staff interpretation of the heritage benefits.
So certainly, I think maybe I'll just start by saying, so we, as staff here at the city and our consultant area, we did spend resources reviewing all of the buildings in this report. And I'll just mention the review that was conducted by the consultant and by staff. It was not 0906. We didn't review every property for designation. And I'd like to offer our legal counsel today, Christine Enta, a chance to speak to that, because I think that's very important to mention.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the problems that we have is that the only place in the Act that refers to the criteria for determining cultural heritage value or interest is that regulation, the 906. So I can appreciate why my colleagues turn to it. However, that regulation is only with respect to looking at the criteria that are set out for the purposes of Clause 29(1)(a) of the Act, which is with respect to actual designation of a property. And what we're dealing with today is the register, which falls under Section 27 of the Act. And so while the language does speak to it, in terms of 27(1.2 that says we can add properties to the register that have not been designated, but for which a municipality feels there is some cultural heritage value, it is not the same process that staff use to determine designation. And so, as you have heard, and I think it's important to distinguish the difference between a snapshot or an inventory of the list of properties in a city like Ottawa, and the process that's used to add a property to the register for the purpose of tracking it, as opposed to using this process, being adding a property to the register, as a surety or a determination of whether or not it can fundamentally be added under designation. And I don't think that this exercise, which is permitted under the Act, is intended to speak to whether or not something will be eventually designated. They are two separate tools used by staff. They are two separate tools permitted under the Act. And while it's easy to conflate that statement of being of cultural heritage value or interest, and then automatically going to the regulation for the prescriptions for designation, staff really do use a broad list of characteristics in taking that snapshot for the process of adding properties that are not yet designated. And, you know, as I've said, the Act permits both, and there should be an understanding that the Act permits both and the difference in the process. Because I think that misunderstanding the process is what leads to this fear that staff have taken a look at the regulation and added this as a precursor to designation, which we've heard from staff does not actually happen. So I can answer any further questions on clarifying the two sections if you'd like, Mr. Chair.
So just for clarity then, in broad strokes, then the registry really is an inventory which is utilized for tracking versus designation, which is really a tool for preservation.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
And so I just, it's not incorrect, but it is misleading to look at that regulation and assume that that is the only criteria that is looked at when preparing this resource in terms of the register for the purpose of the report and the 310 properties we have before us today.
So then my inclination, and I don't know what others on the committee, subcommittee would see here, but my inclination would be for I guess, ensuring that the majority of the properties are placed on the registry, minus 205 Catherine, because of the concern around procedural fairness. When I hear concerns around procedural fairness and proper consultation, and that being raised, you know, I always take heedance to that and want to ensure that we have a proper amount of time where staff actually does consult with the property owner. So that's just my perspective. I did have one more question, which also concerns, I suppose, the precinct, the vicinity of the driveway. I noticed that 50, the driveway, was not recommended for listing in the register through this report, and I was just curious why.
Mr. Chair, that will be a question for our heritage planning staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, thank you for the question. I can answer that question about 50 the driveway. So you're absolutely correct. 50 the driveway was one of the properties identified by ERA as a property to be added to the register, and also a potential candidate for designation under Part 4. It was intended to be part of this report. However, over the summer, the city received an application for demolition with respect to 50 of the driveway. So as per the city's OP policies that provide the city to give immediate attention to threatened resources, staff initiated the designation process for that property. However, the city and the property owner, through their agent, have agreed to pause both the designation process and the demolition application to allow for discussions regarding the future of that building.
Thank you, and I do see Councillor McKinney has an additional question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I actually have an inquiry that I wanted to list on this subcommittee meeting on 50 the driveway. So I don't know, maybe this is a good time to put that out there, because it kind of helps to wrap up that conversation a bit.
Yes, I do appreciate that, and I think we have, I guess, written a copy of your inquiry for the end of the meeting.
Okay, so we'll wait till the end of the meeting. I just wanted to put it out there that I do have an inquiry coming.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And not seeing any more questions. Do any of the members have any more comments on this item?
Carolyn Quinn.
Yes, please go ahead, Vice Chair Quinn.
Thank you, Councillor McKenney. Thank you, Chair King. Yes, I just wanted to comment. I'd like to thank Ms. Enda for clarifying that as clearly as she did in supporting the staff's position on the reason for the register and its role as a monitoring and tracking tool. And I think with that understanding before us, I have no objection in supporting the properties that have been questioned this morning. I will support Councillor Brockington's motion regarding the property at 205 Catherine Street to buy a little more time there under the circumstances, obviously some sort of a glitch. But I do support adding attend the driveway on the register. I think it is a very good, strong example of a lightly brutalist building in spirit and materials. And I do know, for instance, for Councillor Brockington, there's a publication put out by Heritage Ottawa in 2018 on the historic apartment buildings of Ottawa, and Tend the Driveway is included in that book. So I think it's probably maybe worth having a look there. And it's also constructed in 1970, very much part of that transition period for that part of Centertown, following one of the city's first zoning bylaws that encouraged high-rise development in Centertown. And it's part of that history. It's part of that period and what evolved and what was developed before sort of brakes started to be put on it, because there was such a massive demolition of houses in order to enable that it sort of went off the deep end in some respects. But it's part of that history of Centertown, and so I think it's worth maintaining on the registry. And so I will be supporting the staff recommendation and Councillor Brockington's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn. And I see that Member Podolsky also has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much. You asked for comments, and I think that I will be supporting the staff recommendation with Councillor Brockington's amendment there for the delay on 205 Catherine. But I think that this is a moment where the three of the properties that are subject to discussion today that have taken a certain amount of our time, namely 10 Driveway, 205 Catherine, and also Catherine McKenney raised the question of 50 the Driveway. These are all buildings which are mid-century modern, constructed after the Second World War and also into the 60s and 70s. I think that one of the things that we have difficulty with in determining whether or not they should be on the register or whether they conform to Regulation 0906 is inhibited in our city by the fact that we have not done a full inventory and evaluation of our mid-century modern portfolio of buildings. We have almost 50 years of experience in Ottawa on our late 19th century, early 20th century heritage, initiated in the early 1960s by the NCC, but we have never turned our attention to properly doing an inventory of our modern architecture. And other cities have done this, Los Angeles and other American cities and some Canadian cities, but Ottawa has never yet initiated this program, which means that the three properties that we were talking about today are kind of orphans inside of an intellectual and survey and evaluation vacuum. And I would suggest that the sooner we can get this full inventory of mid-century modern buildings into our program, the better we will be in understanding them and also being able to assess whether they should be designated or not. So that's my comment, Chair King, and I think that I appreciate the chance to do that.
Thank you, Member Podolsky. And I do have some comments myself. Pursuing the protection of built heritage ensures the protection of buildings that represent a combination of aesthetic, historical, cultural, and social importance. Consequently, I'm pleased to support the addition of buildings to the Heritage Register based on the comprehensive Centertown Heritage Study presented to us today, notwithstanding 205 Catherine Street for additional consultation, as we had heard. I'd like to congratulate our professional city staff for their efforts concerning this study and listing. As we know, Section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act allows municipalities to include on the municipal register properties of cultural heritage value that have not been designated. This process, as we've heard, is commonly known as listing. Listing is a means to formally identify properties that have cultural heritage value or interest to the community. The purpose of Section 27 is to address a common problem faced in protecting heritage buildings, that of buildings being demolished and replaced before they can be assessed for their heritage value. Through the registrar, the city ensures that listed buildings are not lost before being identified or being formally recognized in a long heritage designation process. As a community, we should note that the listing of a property to the registrar does not automatically lead to heritage designation. Listing a property on the Heritage Register also does not prevent owners from making repairs, alterations, or additions to their properties. What it does ensure is that city planners have 60 days to assess a building to determine if it warrants protection before potential demolition. This is contrasted with the 20 days typically required pursuant to the Building Code Act for a decision to be made on a demolition permit. As a tool, the registry allows city staff and councillors to provide a period of public notice, especially in scenarios when buildings are at risk of demolition, along with opportunities to promote knowledge and enhance understanding of the community's cultural heritage. The register also constitutes a quality planning document that can be consulted by municipal decision makers when reviewing development proposals or permit applications. Indeed, the registrar provides easily accessible information about cultural heritage properties for land use planners, property owners, developers, the tourism industry, educators, and the general public. In order to recognize the significance of Ottawa's historic places from the past, as well to ensure protection of present and future generations, formally identifying properties that may have cultural heritage value is of absolute importance to our community. The registrar is therefore an important tool in conservation planning and in providing a measure of interim protection. Consequently, I'll be supporting the staff recommendations today. And I believe that we are seeking an amending motion to this report concerning 205 Catherine. And I believe that was moved by Councillor Brockington. So I see it's on the screen. I would invite Councillor Brockington to read the motion.
Thanks, Chair. Again, referring to 205 Catherine, be it resolved that the report be amended by deleting from document 1 the following property, 205 Catherine Street, and be it further resolved that references in the report to 310 be replaced by the new total of properties being recommended for addition to the Heritage Register. Be it further resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee direct staff to consult with the owners of deferred property and that staff bring back to Built Heritage Subcommittee at its November 13th, 2020 meeting a recommendation of whether the deferred property should be added to the Heritage Register in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Is the motion carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Is the report carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. This report is scheduled to be presented to Council on October 28th. The next item on our agenda is Ontario Heritage Act proposed regulations pursuant to Bills 108. And I do believe that Vice Chair Quinn has a motion to be added to this report to the agenda.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair King. I'll read the motion now, Eric. Whereas the Built Heritage Subcommittee Agenda 16 was distributed to members and published to ottawa.ca on October 1st, and the report for this item was distributed and published on October 9th of this year as soon as it was available. And whereas the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Cultural Industries on September 21st, 2020, invited comments on proposed regulations under the Ontario Heritage Act to be submitted by November 5, 2020. Therefore, be it resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee consider the report Ontario Heritage Act proposed regulations pursuant to Bill 108, pursuant to Section 893 of the Rules of Procedure, so that Council may consider the report prior to the Province of Ontario's comment due date.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn. Is the motion carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Apologies for the little dance we were doing there, trying to get the camera working. I do have a brief set of slides, if it would be helpful for the committee. This report is very technical in nature, and I apologize if you fell asleep trying to read it, but it is also very important to the work that we do. So I would like the opportunity to provide a few slides if the committee coordinator, Eric, if you could put those up for me, that'd be great. Thank you. So the report before the committee today is a bit of an overview on the legislative changes that have come from Bill 108. It was prepared by both planning staff and legal staff. So I have Mr. Garrett Schramm is here with us as well to answer any legal questions there might be or provide any additional comments. So if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. As committee members may remember, Bill 108, which amended several pieces of provincial legislation, including the Ontario Heritage Act, received royal assent in June of 2019. Many of the amendments for the Ontario Heritage Act were delayed until the associated regulations could be drafted. After some initial consultation in January 2020, there had not been any movement by the province until September 21st of this year, we presume due to COVID, when the draft regulations were released. Staff were not expecting the regulations at this time, and the short timeline for commenting is the reason that the report had to be forwarded to committee members after the publication of the agenda. The majority of the content, as I mentioned, is technical in nature, but does have wide-ranging impacts on the work of the Heritage Planning Branch and on the work of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. So through the presentation, I'm going to try to provide an overview of both the legislative changes which have already been approved and are planned to come into place in January, and the proposed regulations which staff have provided comment on in this report. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the impacts of Bill 108 on the Ontario Heritage Act. So this is already been approved by the province, but just as a refresher for the committee, all appeals under the Ontario Heritage Act will now go to the Land Use Planning Appeals Tribunal, and this includes appeals related to designations. So right now, appeals to designations are forwarded to the Conservation Review Board, designations under Part 4, I should say. But now the Land Use Planning Appeals Tribunal will retain the final say on designations. What we would normally call alterations to remove a heritage attribute. So similar to the application that the committee heard earlier this year regarding the removal of the chapel at 175 Main Street. These will now follow a new process and be processed as applications for demolition of an attribute, which has a different process associated with it under the Act. Bill 108 gave the minister the power to prescribe principles to guide decision-making on heritage issues. I'm going to review the proposed principles under the regulations, and added timelines related to issuing a notice of intention to designate, adopting designation bylaws, and deeming applications complete or incomplete. Next slide, please. So the regulations, which were released for comment on September 21st, fulfill a number of outstanding items from Bill 108, which I just reviewed. The regulations, as I said, are very technical, but to give you a big picture idea of what the regulations do, they prescribe principles to guide decision-making under parts 4 and 5 of the Act. These include language that says that decisions of council shall consider the cultural heritage value of the property. They should demonstrate openness and transparency in decision-making and encourage adaptive reuse. The timeline I noted in the previous slide of 90 days to issue a notice of intention to designate is further defined in the regulations. For properties where there is an associated official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, or plan of subdivision application, staff will have to bring forward a report to Built Heritage Subcommittee and City Council within 90 days of the notice of a complete application under the Planning Act. This is a very short timeline. The regulations do also provide some exceptions to this 90-day rule, including where the owner is in agreement with the city's approach to designation. The regulations prescribe the contents of a designation bylaw, so this will require an update to our existing work. And also, we foresee some issues with the Land Registry Office, which we hope will be resolved as a result of the provincial legislation. And then, as I mentioned, a new process that must be followed after the demolition or removal of a building or heritage attribute on a designated property. So basically, this process would require council to reconsider whether the property retains its cultural heritage value after the removal of an attribute. Next slide, please. The regulations also prescribe mandatory application requirements for applications under Part 4 of the Act. This requires an update to the city's processes as well. And the regulations prescribe the materials to be included in appeals to LPAT and provide transition measures for items that commence prior to proclamation. Next slide, please. So in general, staff support the goals of the regulations to bring greater consistency to processes under the Ontario Heritage Act across the province. However, after discussions with heritage planning colleagues in other municipalities, we believe that in order to support the reality of implementation of these regulations at the municipal level, there are 4 key concerns that we've identified. The key issue is the timing of the proposed proclamation. The ministry is proposing January 1st, 2021 as the implementation date for all legislative changes and regulations. The regulation comment period does not end until November the 5th, so the city will have less than 2 months to prepare for significant changes to our work. Earlier consultation from the ministry had proposed an 18-month phased approach to the implementation. Given the current pandemic and existing pressures on staff resources, implementation in 2.5 months from now poses a significant challenge for the Heritage Planning Branch. Through the letter attached as document 2 to the report, staff have recommended that the implementation be delayed to January 2021 to provide municipalities with time to recover from COVID, hopefully, and prepare to implement the changes through new business processes and procedures. As you'll see on pages 6 and 7 of the staff report, the changes have a significant impact on the work of our the Heritage Planning Branch. The second issue we've identified is the language used in the principles for decision making. Staff are concerned about the vagueness of the proposed language, conflicts with the provincial policy statement, and the delayed release of the updated Ontario Heritage Toolkit, which you may be familiar with. This is an associated document that provides additional interpretation and guidance for municipalities in undertaking designation, listing, and alterations under the Ontario Heritage Act. The third item is the proposed process for the demolition or removal of buildings or heritage attributes. As written, the new process in the regulations will require that staff prepare a report for the consideration of committee and council anytime any building or structure on a designated property is removed or a heritage attribute is removed. And just to remind you, that heritage attribute could be something as minor as a window. And that report, the process will require council to reconsider the designation and determine if the property continues to have cultural heritage value. Staff believe this process is too onerous as it relates to both minor alterations to remove heritage attributes such as windows or doors, and should be better detailed to reflect only the demolition or removal of a building or structure that has cultural heritage value according to the bylaw. So the way that this is currently written, staff would be required to follow this process if somebody wanted to remove a modern 1995 garage that just happens to be located on a designated property. Finally, as noted, the regulation includes prescribed events for the issuance of a notice of intention to designate. So those prescribed events are the notice of a complete application under the Planning Act. And staff believe that the proposed prescribed event is too early in the process to allow appropriate time to consider a property for designation. So these issues are detailed in the letter attached as document 1, and the chart attached as document 2 provides more detailed comments on several other issues. We are proposing that both of these documents be forwarded to the ministry for their consideration. And then I just have one last slide. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I've talked a little bit about what the changes are, and I've alluded to the fact that these will have significant impacts on our work. But just to give the committee an idea of how this will truly impact us as we move forward, this slide provides an overview of some of the impacts on the Heritage Planning Branch as a result of both the legislative and regulation changes to the Ontario Heritage Act. The new legislation requires that the city update and create several new procedures and tools to assist in the conservation of heritage resources. These are detailed at the top of page 6 of the staff report, but generally include a new system for screening all planning applications, updates to the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement terms of reference, new processes and procedures for listing, removing, and processing objections to properties on the register, a new tracking system for application timelines, new designation procedures, and new procedures for holding and documenting public meetings. In addition to the internal process updates, the broader impacts of the legislation and regulation are also noted. In terms of timing, if the ministry does not take the city's recommendation to delay implementation, there will be impacts on the city's heritage action plan, including several priority projects such as the Centretown Heritage Study that you've heard about today, the Lowertown and Byward Market HCD updates. Staff are concerned that as a result of the additional research and administrative requirements, it will be difficult to meet statutory deadlines, and there will be impediments to other priority projects for the branch. This may result in the loss of significant built heritage resources. Once the ministry confirms the implementation schedule, staff will bring forward the necessary processes for approval and any resourcing requests in future budgets and or reports. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee might have. And I'd also like to offer the opportunity for my colleague, Mr. Schramm from Legal, to add anything that perhaps I missed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I don't know if Garrett has anything else to add before we ask.
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. Does the subcommittee have any other questions for staff on this item? And I see that Vice Chair Quinn has raised her hand.
Thank you, Chair King. Just a clarification. In your report, Ms. Collins, you mentioned that staff is recommending a delay from the regulations coming into effect in January 2021. Did you mean that you're requesting your delay to January 2022?
Yes, I'm sorry. I guess I misspoke. So a 1-year delay is what we are requesting.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Were there any other questions? I did have just one quick question. I know that this is new legislation and we don't have much more data around it, but I'm just curious about the staffing requirements. You noted that Heritage would require more staff to undertake this work. Is there enough information from the province to determine what those staffing requirements would be?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I don't think we have that information. I think we're going to have to see what the implementation schedule is and then sort of feel out how those changes impact us. So I would imagine that it would be next year before we would know that.
Excellent, thank you. And I do see that member Podolsky has a question as well.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. Is the letter that, if council sends it, to the province? Is this joining with letters and submissions from other municipalities? Again, are we looking for an exception for Ottawa only?
Thank you. We recently coordinated a session with colleagues from about 10 other municipalities around the province, including some of the other big cities. And everybody is focused on this timeline as being a challenge. So we are seeking it as a blanket exception, not that it just be Ottawa, because I think every municipality in the province is facing similar issues regarding COVID and staffing and all that sort of thing, and this short implementation timeline. Because although we've known that the legislation is coming forward and these changes are coming, we couldn't really do any of the work to update our processes until we knew what the regulations were going to say, and we just found that out in September. So
I, like other members of the committee, I'm sure we'll keep our fingers crossed.
And apologies on the order. I skipped this on the agenda. I do see that we had David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa registered to potentially speak on this item. So I just wanted to check to see if Mr. Fleming still wanted to provide a submission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support this 100%. We're just getting into looking through these regulations now, and have some concerns that we hope we will be able to raise with city staff as the implementation goes on. Certainly to do that between now and January, I think is going to be a real challenge. And we 100% support the letter from the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Fleming. And once again, apologies for not going before members. I was just wondering if members have any other comments on this item. And seeing no other comments, is report carried?
Yes.
Carried.
This report will be presented to council on October 28th, 2020. Now moving on with the agenda. In-camera items, we've had none to date. Notice of motions for consideration at a subsequent meeting, none to date. But we do have an inquiry from Councillor McKinney. And I see that.
Thank you. I'm on a second Zoom call, sorry. Yes, as I stated earlier, this is in reference to 50 the driveway, which was brought up earlier. And a special meeting of Built Heritage Subcommittee was called on August 24th, 2020, for the consideration of the issuance of a notice of intention to designate 50 the driveway. The meeting was canceled as staff and the property owner initiated discussions on the future of the property. Could staff please provide a formal inquiry response detailing the status of the 50 the driveway heritage file, progress on negotiations, and expected timelines when the report would be back before committee? And that would be for next committee.
Thank you, Councillor McKinney, for that inquiry. So that's in receipt for staff to follow up. Other business, planning circulations. Official plan amendment and zoning and bylaw amendment proposal summary for 100 Argyle Avenue has been zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control proposal summary for 4 Range Road.
Chair, I was trying to get your attention under other business.
Oh, sorry, my internet had cut out there for a little bit. Councillor Brockington for other business.
You just want to finish the planning circulation bit you were on? Is there anything else under that you want to get?
Well, I'll go to that and then I'll jump back. So there are 2 planning circulations on the agenda, which were distributed to members prior to the meeting. Members of the public had the opportunity to comment through DevApps on ottawa.ca, and Ontario Heritage application will be required for the project at 100 Argyle Avenue and would be considered here at subcommittee. An application has not been submitted, but is a requirement for this project. For 4 Range Road, staff will consider the related Ontario Heritage Act application under delegated authority. And that is it, but I will jump back to other business for Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't sure whether this is a public inquiry or other business, and that is, could staff please issue a memo to committee members outlining their proposed 2021 work plan? I'm very interested to know what, in particular, what other communities are going to be under review for the Heritage Register. There's been some talk about a community in my ward, and so I'm just interested if they could very briefly outline their plans for 2021 by way of a memo.
Sorry. Yes, that's no problem, Mr. Chair. We can provide that.
Excellent. And Councillor Brockington, would you like that in the form of a formal direction?
I will yield to you and the coordinator to whatever's best.
Okay. Well, I think that a formal direction there is appropriate, so that information can come back to a subcommittee. I do see that Member Podolsky has his hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. This is just a follow-up on our discussion about the Centertown Survey and Analysis Heritage Program. Could we also ask staff to, in a memo of some kind, just report back on whether or not an inventory and assessment of mid-century modern buildings in Ottawa is actually on the work plan, or can it be on the work plan, and if so, when? Because it's an important tool that will be needed in order to be able to assess the buildings that might be coming forward for designation. And I think that it's something that has been raised before by the heritage community over the last decade. And I would like to know whether or not it has made its way onto work plan, and if so, when. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I can provide Mr. Podolsky with an answer now. Perhaps we can provide an update later, but I guess the short answer is that a specific project related to a modern inventory is not currently on the work plan. It is a project that we believe we should undertake in the future, but we see it as part of a sort of a grouping of larger projects where the register continues to evolve over time. So we see doing sort of an inventory of cultural landscapes, looking at sort of properties that maybe have better represent the diversity of our community. So maybe not architecturally that interesting, but have important or historical value or associative value to different communities. And then I think other projects such as looking at a broader modernist inventory and perhaps other sort of rural inventories, that kind of thing, are on our plans for the future as the Heritage Register evolves, but we don't have a specific work plan item to that effect at this time. So I would anticipate that we will do it, but I don't have a timeline for you at this time. So if you prefer to have that in writing, I can provide it, but I'm not sure if that answers the question.
I think that, thank you for answering the question. I think it would be a good idea to circulate in a memo the status report on that. I think that in dealing with the heritage of the core of the city, particularly the huge portfolio of buildings built, after the Second World War, we should be really taking the lead of those other cities that have made an effort to do this some time ago. And I think that we're behind schedule on this to our disadvantage. And so I think that this should be an agenda item in the future this coming year. But for the moment, I appreciate your report on that. Thank you, Leslie.
And thank you, Member Podolsky, for that question. And once again, I think we'll also take that as a formal direction to staff to provide a response to both the member and subcommittee. Is there any other business for this meeting? Seeing none, we move towards adjournment. On adjournment, is the motion carried?
Carried.
Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. So our next regular meeting is scheduled for Friday, November 13th, 2020. Have a great day.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.